Welcome to another mod with me, where we will cultivate a creative connection to the decks in my collection. Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today we are going to be trimming and edging the Lover's Path Tarot. So I picked up this lovely box set of the Lover's Path Tarot at a vintage, like a community vintage sale. And it comes in this great box, and it's actually in fairly good condition considering how old this deck is. Now the book is a little bit worn, but it's a beautiful book. Look at how gorgeous this book is. It is beautiful full color, and I know we're not here to really talk about the book. The binding is a bit broken. I mean, it's definitely an older book, but it's just a gorgeously produced little book. I'm really excited to have gotten the box set that came with the book because I love a good guidebook, and this one is really pretty. I might have to do some rebinding to it at some point, so who knows, that might be in the future another sort of book mod that we might do. But for today, we're going to set the beautiful book aside, and we're going to talk about these cards. So it has the little box inside of here as well. It sits in there. And in general, this, box within a box within a box, not really my favorite because it's a lot of packaging and it's going to go to waste. It is what it is. So here is the lovely deck, and I did look through the cards. So it comes with the title cards, and it does have a little white book as well. I think this deck is still available. I think it might have been out of print for a while, and then I think it came back into print. I should probably look that up. I will look that up before the end of this video. I think that these are not quite lined up the same, but we might make use of these title cards. At any rate, today we're going to be trimming this deck down. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the white borders anyway, but this deck is used, and the white borders are looking a little bit worn. I have put it back in order, and I do really think the cards are beautiful, and I'd like to take the borders completely off and just take it down to this lovely kind of gold border. So it's not a deck that I really think that I'm going to be able to recognize the cards on, so that's also another issue because here's the Judgment card. I'm not sure that looking at that I would think Judgment. The minors are a little bit better because they do have the number of whatever it is. They are a little bit more Rider-Waite-Smith, so those are a little bit easier for me to contend with because I can look at these and pretty much tell for the most part what they are. Now I do have to see the printing on this deck is a little bit washed out, but I don't know if that's just because this is an old copy. I of course don't like the white borders on the back of this red, but at any rate, that is a couple of the things that we're going to have to contend with before I actually start to trimming. I think that for this particular one, because I have the book, I think that I could use the book, just trim the borders off and use the book, but I don't know that I necessarily want to have to... Am I missing a fool? There it is. I don't know that I necessarily want to have to do that every time. So we might see about maybe somehow writing in, at least for the majors, the number of the card so that I can tell that this is, the Emperor. So I do like the overall lover theme of this deck. I think it's very beautiful. I love the images. I love the artwork. And I just think it's going to be a gorgeous one once I've taken these white borders and all this excess text off, which really doesn't go with the beautiful kind of aged look of this deck. And of course, when you look at the backs, that stark white border around this, red and sort of aged like an old book looking back really doesn't work. So that is what we are going to do today. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So before I actually begin trimming this deck, one of the things that I wanted to do was go ahead and write the numbers on the cards of the Major Arcana. So if we take a look here at the Major Arcana, there isn't anything within these cards that necessarily speaks to me of the majors that it represents. I do love the images, and I haven't read the book yet, and I'm sure the stories do relate. I mean, I could definitely see Arthur and Guinevere for the position of the Emperor, or Power as it's known in this deck. I'm also not a huge fan of when they change the titles of the Major Arcana. Sometimes it works really well, and I think that it's a great addition, and sometimes I think that it's done just to do it. So being as I haven't read the book, I cannot say one way or the other what the deal is with the change in the Major Arcana for this deck. Truth be told, this deck is like, I kind of feel like, because I got it secondhand, I just need to kind of mod it and cleanse it and kind of go through my own little thing before I'm ready to really work with it. So I haven't really taken a look at the book other than to just flip through it and say, that's a beautiful book. So being that just glancing at the card, I know that there's not anything in here that like I would necessarily look at this card and go, oop, that's the Fool. So what I'm going to do is actually just write the numbers as carefully and as small as I can on the card, within the card artwork, which is what I'll be keeping because I am going to be chopping off the white borders. So I've done a little bit of a test here, and I've written in, I've used a Sharpie paint pen, metallic Sharpie paint pen, and I've written numbers on the cards. I did try to write it up here in the red, thinking that perhaps I would write it next to the title or the names on the cards, but it just really didn't show up that well. So I think what I'm going to do is actually write it down in one of the corners, and I played with two different ideas. I just kind of made some Roman numerals here at random, and I did just a regular number. So I was trying to decide which way I wanted to go. I think that given that I'm going to write it in a very small space, I'm going to go with just a regular numerical number rather than the Roman numerals, because it's a little bit smaller. It's going to be easier for me to write because I want these numbers to be really unobtrusive, but I want to be able to actually see them. So in other words, I want them to look like they kind of belong there as best I can. So that's kind of my plan for this deck. So before I really get into trimming anything off, I'm going to go ahead and write the numbers on them. I have done the test. I have made sure it's going to stick, and it seems to be doing just fine. This isn't a super glossy deck. It's got actually pretty nice cardstock. I kind of like it. So I'm okay. I think I'm going to be okay with being able to retain that. So before I start chopping into the Major Arcana, I want to go ahead and write those numbers on there. So I got the numbers all written on the cards, and they're very small there, but I think that they are definitely readable, and for the most part, they came out fine. There are a couple numbers that kind of, just the ink was a bit runny, but I think overall it's going to work just fine. So you can see 7 right there, down in that corner. It's very unobtrusive, and hopefully it won't interfere with the design of the card. I can probably get it off if it does, and I decide I don't want to do it, or I don't want to keep it, but for right now, they're still kind of a little bit wet. So actually what I'm going to do is stack them up here a little bit. So we're just going to let those kind of hang out on the side around my workspace here and dry a little bit longer. I can get through at least one side of the rest of the minors before I have to really start messing with them too much. That just gives them a little extra drying time. So I'm going to be using my regular trimmer, and I'm also going to be using my little angled, or my little triangle ruler here. I've been finding that this has really made the process go a lot faster, and it's really helping me to keep my cards even more precisely cut, because it's giving me something for them to rest up against, and I don't have to like really measure every single card because I've already used this to make my measurements. And so I'm going to continue that process probably from here on out until I find something even better. So for right now, this is what we're going to be using. I think to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do my 2 sides and my top first, just because those are going to be, I think, less of a concern than the bottom is. Are these the same? I forgot I held these out for this. Sometimes I do like to keep the title cards because I use them in craft projects, but these look like they are the same. So let's work with this first. When they have a title card, that's always handy to be able to test. It doesn't have this extra little title thing on the side, but it looks like the main borders are in the same spot. So let's go ahead and figure out where we need to be. We need to get some washi going. I use washi for this because washi comes off of everything. Like I could stick it on a card and it comes off and it doesn't peel anything away. And so I like to use washi for that because it's just a little bit extra protection for my cards. So I want to make sure that I'm getting just that white off. So I'm using my ruler because, as I've mentioned in other videos, the thickness of my ruler is the same thickness as this guard here, where this guard sits between the guard and the blade. And so by using that, I can take a look here and see pretty much where my blade is going to come down. And it's going to be right there. And that allows me to be really precise, or as precise as I can be, because I am still doing this by hand, right? I mean, I'm not machine cutting here, so I am still cutting by hand. I am still doing 1 card at a time, and that can mean that nothing is actually precise. So I'm just going to tape my guide down. I've just pushed it up against the edge of my card here, and that's why I've washied this card down for the moment, just so that I can make sure it's staying where it's supposed to. Then we're going to washi this side down. I want to make sure that I get my corners down pretty well, because I don't want my card to slip up underneath it. Because see, like this corner is still popping up. But I also don't want my washi to impede my card, so I need to make sure I keep it out of the way. So that's in there pretty good. Sometimes I use 3 pieces, sometimes 2. So I think, let's go ahead and pull the washi off. Whoops, rip the washi. Washi, washi. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our first cut as a test. As always, I'm going to be pressing down up top and up bottom just to make sure that my card isn't sliding around as my blade is putting pressure on it. And I'm checking where my blade's coming down. And it looks to be pretty much right on it. So yeah, I think that's pretty dang close. Here's what our back's gonna look like. So I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that measurement. I'm gonna hang on to this so we can keep using it for a test. And I'm gonna go ahead and trim off the first side of this whole deck. I'm gonna work my way through the minors first, and then I'll pick up all those majors and do that. And now, because this deck is bowed, I do need to make sure that I'm holding everything down and getting it flat before I'm making a cut, to make sure that everything's lining up properly. And I can tell you right now, I'm a little bit further into that blue than I really wanted to be, but I think it'll work. So I'm just gonna work my way through this deck, being as careful as I can, but also working fairly quickly, because 78 cards is a lot to go through, especially doing it 1 side at a time. But totally worth it in the end, because it'll allow the deck to shuffle much better. So I've got the right side of the deck all cut off, and using this as my guide gave me a really straight cut. And for the most part, most of the cards are exactly the same size, which is always fabulous. So now I'm basically going to flip the deck around, reset my measurements, and do the same thing on the other side. All right, so that is both sides taken off, and I think already it looks a ton better. I think this is going to be a really great mod when it's done. So now I'm just going to basically cut off the top, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut off the bottom. We will take a quick peek in between just so that you can see, but it is basically the same process over and over again. I'm just flipping it around, remeasuring, and doing my thing. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the tops off now, and then we'll come back right before I cut the bottoms off just so that you can see what this deck looks like with just the bottoms retained, in case that's something that you want to do. Okay, so I've trimmed the 3 sides off of the deck, and just in case anyone is interested in seeing the deck with just those titles retained at the bottom, this is kind of what it looks like. Of course, I haven't rounded the corners or anything, but it's quite pretty like this as well, although I think the white just really kind of stands out, and not necessarily in a great way in contrast to these really sort of antique yellow images. But I think that if you wanted to retain the titles on the bottom, it would work just fine as well. So I'm going to basically finish trimming up this deck. I'm going to round the corners, so I'll be using my Katamaro rounder. I will probably just be using the medium. It's a great size for this size of a deck. Large would be great, I think, to really soften the deck, but with these really kind of micro borders, that's going to cut into them quite a bit. And in fact, now that I think about it, I might try the small first just to see if that might help keep more of that border here, because it might completely cut the corner off. So we'll just have to wait and see. When I get to that point, I'll play with it a little bit and check it out. But for now, I'm going to finish cutting all the titles off. I'm going to round the corners, and then we'll check back in and look at edging the deck. Okay, so I have finished trimming up and corner rounding this entire deck. I ended up using the small corner rounder just to maintain as much of that border as I could, and I think that they look fantastic. I did also kind of give them a wipe down because this is a used deck, and I did find some little sort of imperfections and things on the card. Like here's one that there's still a little bit of like residue on the card that I need to try to get off. But for right now, I mean, I think it looks so much better. It's so pretty like this. And I really do like it. I'm glad that I wrote the little numbers on the major arcana so I would have an idea of what they were. And I think that the backs came out all right. For the most part, it's definitely closer down, clipped down to the bottom than it is on the top, but that really doesn't bother me any. And this deck, I think just, yeah, I mean, I think it just needs to be gold. I did consider maybe doing some sort of like burgundy red, but I think this deck, being that it's the Lover's Path and it's got all this lovely gold bordering on it, I think it just needs to be trimmed in gold. And I'm not a fan of gold gilding, but I don't mind my gold stamps because it doesn't add anything to the cards. So I'm just going to do my usual process, although I guess I haven't used a stamp in quite some time. So just kind of do a quick look at how I go about it. I'm using the Brilliance Galaxy Gold, and these come in just the Dewdrop stamp. They just come in a little pack. And one of the things that I really like about stamps is it's wet, so it's very forgiving. It will run all over the card. So basically, I'm just going to go around the card here, and I'm going to rub it on. And I tend to do 2 coats with stamps, just as I do with marker, because I want to get a nice even coat. And then I just run it around the run a paper towel around it to wipe that excess off, and then I just set it aside and let it dry. So there is a little bit of a longer drying time with the stamps because it is a very wet ink. They take a little bit longer to dry. I usually leave them at least 20 minutes, if not a little bit longer depending on what I'm doing. I do not stack them up for, you know, a good 20 minutes to half hour because I don't want any of it rubbing off on the insides, the front or back of the cards, I mean. So it's a real quick and easy process for the most part, just kind of going around, stamping it. Again, it's very, very forgiving. So you can wipe the excess off that runs off the front and back. And then you just get this nice little kind of metallic gold look to it. You could use a metallic marker as well, but I like the look for the most part of the stamps, and it's quick and easy for me to do. And I haven't done one with a stamp for a while, so I thought this would be a good deck to do that with. It does end up kind of getting everywhere, but that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and finish edging the deck, and we'll check back in when it's all done. So I finished edging the entire deck in the Brilliance stamp, and I think it turned out really, really nice. It definitely matches the gold that we have on the fronts, and I did actually only do one coat on it because I didn't really feel that it needed a second coat. This is a new stamp, and it worked beautifully. Look at the sides catching that gilding. You can see it on the back as well. So let's take a quick peek through the deck. Now I have it all trimmed. I think it looks beautiful. I'm glad I went with the small corners because I think that that helps retain a little bit of that frame that we have around the borders. And actually, I really don't mind all this excess border around here. I think it's done really well and it's really pretty. So yeah, gorgeous, gorgeous deck. I'm really happy that I was able to get a hold of it. I think I paid, I want to say maybe $2 or $3 for this deck. Let's go ahead and give it a shuffle because I always like to see how it shuffles after I trim it. And it does rifle shuffle fairly well. It's still pretty stiff. This is pretty stiff. It's kind of cardboardy, cardstock. I actually don't mind it. And I'm not sure that the person I bought this from used it a whole lot. So it overhands nicely, of course. So let's go ahead and lay out a few cards just to see how they look. I think they are beautiful, and I'm really happy with the way they look trimmed. Just taking that white border off, I think kind of just made it look a little bit more cohesive. And again, because this was a used deck, even though I don't think it had been used a lot, I think it's been sitting around for a long time, and it kind of had a little bit of a worn, aged look to those edges, which didn't quite match the rest of the beautiful artwork in the back, because while this does look very kind of aged in a sense, it doesn't look worn in a dirty sense. It just looks worn in a sense that it's aged and it's timeless. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's just kind of how it works out in my brain. And I do like that I was able to take the time and actually clean each card. So I did actually wipe each card down. Overall, I am really pleased with the way that this deck turned out. Thank you for joining me for this mod with me. You will find links for the decks and products that I have used in this video in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this process and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.